Hello, welcome to Hoot episode 27, Gloo Cilium and Istio seamlessly together. Network policies are highly recommended along with the L7 security policies based on Istio's security best practice documentation. These resources, unfortunately, are different learnings for our user. How can we really make this easy for our user? Today, we're going to discuss some of the thoughts from the Solo team on how to glue Cilium and Istio together. I am your host, and I'm so looking forward to learn this topic with Eitan and Scott together. Eitan and Scott, do you mind introduce yourself quickly? Eitan, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, I'm Eitan. I am a member of the Office of the CTO here at Solo. Been here for about 3.5 years, and I work on everything under the sun, up to and including Cilium, Istio, and all things CNCF.
Awesome, Scott.
Scotty?
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Lynn. I'm Scott Weiss. I am an architect in the Office of the CTO. I've been in Solo for 4.5 years. I've also worked on pretty much everything under the architecture for our core products and integrations, things like that. Kind of not always as down and dirty as Eitan, but then I learned it from him, and the cycle is complete. So between the two of us, we got it locked down. But yeah, excited to talk about Cilium today and expanding the vision for our products here at Solo.
Yeah, that's so excited. Before we get to the episode, the content, let's get to the news first. So first news I want to share is solo.io adds Cilium to our Gloo Mesh product. We publish a blog actually in multiple places, but also on the Solo.io blog where Edith talk about how Gloo Mesh can enable Cilium in the Gloo application network platform in terms of multi-tenancy, consistent identity, and optimization by the kernel to continue innovate and push the boundary of what service mesh can do. CNCF has published the service mesh survey. To be honest, I do feel the survey is pretty misleading. The fact is that a lot of the people filling out the survey are actually running Kubernetes in very, very small scale. Like 65% of the audience is running in 2 to 5 clusters. So I would take the result with a grain of salt because of that factor. One thing I would say really interesting about the survey is 79% of the audience are using mutual TLS, which is the top feature people want out of service mesh, which is consistent from what we are hearing from our customers at Solo. Matt Klein introduced Envoy Gateway as implementation of the Kubernetes Gateway API. Unfortunately, when I go to the repo, I haven't really seen much code out there. I think it's mainly just the documentation of the moment. Istio, on the other hand, already have a gateway implementation in the Istio community. So this so if you want to try a gateway implementation, I definitely recommend to use what Istio provides. Isovalent has announced Tetragon as a new open source eBPF-based security and observability and runtime enforcement. So that's an exciting project brought by our friends at Isovalent. Last but not the least, we also find out Apollo GraphQL launches its Supergraph based on Federation v2. So I couldn't find out a UI for this, but this sounds something pretty interesting to federate the graphs and allow single pane of glass for their user. One last thing before we get to the episode is thank you so much, Max. You have helped us publish the steps for our episode 25. I've also run through the steps. So yeah, I've actually got spell integration with the latest Istio 1.14 to be released this week with spell to do the attestation of the pod's identity. So very cool if you're interested to running the step. That is the news for this week. So let's get to what is Cilium?
Scotty, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Cilium is a CNI for Kubernetes. It implements Kubernetes network interface. It's responsible for assigning IPs to pods as well as a bunch of other functionality. It leverages the eBPF, the Berkeley packet filter technology, using some kernel code to more efficiently handle packets, do filtering and observability. And it's become quite a popular CNI for use in Kubernetes. It's got uses such as enforcing policy at the L3, L4 level. That's on TCP IP, as well as connecting nodes together. So when you're running multiple Kubernetes nodes, for them to actually communicate with each other, you need some kind of overlay network to allow that to happen. Cilium provides that functionality. It also provides some options in terms of multi-cluster networking, as well as bridging your cluster to an external environment like your AWS VPC. I don't know if Eitan, you have anything to add to that.
Do you want to add anything, Eitan? Oh.
No, I think you really covered all the points. I think that, and just to reiterate, that really, I think what separates Cilium and why we think it's such a great product is all of the use of eBPF, and that really allows Cilium to do these policy decisions really quickly, as well as offer very deep insight into your Kubernetes clusters, being able to see all of the traffic and all of the policy decisions and everything that's happening at real time. And so, yeah, we think that is incredibly powerful for a CNI to ship with by default.
Yeah, totally. We've seen most of the cloud providers support Cilium now. There's just a tremendous excitement from KubeCon last week about Cilium. Can you describe Cilium's security model for folks who are not familiar with it?
Definitely. So, essentially, Cilium, because as we mentioned, it is a CNI, it operates at the L3, L4 level. And what that means is that Cilium speaks in terms of IPs. So Cilium knows, it keeps track of all of the IPs for all of the pods in the cluster. And for something like their multi-cluster offering, which is the cluster mesh, they keep track of IPs in the other clusters when they're bridged. But it keeps track of all the pod IPs, and it can make policy decisions based on those IPs, right? So based on if you have a specific pod trying to talk to a source pod and a destination pod, depending on the labels and other metadata, Cilium can make a decision. Should I allow this packet to go through? Should I not allow this packet to go through? So essentially, it exists, right? Because Cilium is already there. It's already allocating these IPs and everything. It has deep knowledge, and it actually does those policy decisions from within the kernel using eBPF.
So what are the issues with these type of network-based identity model? I think you've been talking about based on IP addresses.
Yeah, so I mean, quintessentially, right, when you have an IP, right, the system based on identity based on IPs can really only scale to a certain degree. And actually, it's very interesting that this talk is occurring after you just mentioned the Spire integration and that talk that that already happened. Because when you are running multiple clusters, you need a method of identifying the things that exist on all those clusters, right? And it is also possible that if you're running clusters in multiple clouds, multiple regions, multiple data centers, you're on-prem, you're everywhere. People are running stuff everywhere now. And it's at that point, there's no way to assume that everything's going to have a unique IP, right? There's just no way. And so when you have a network identity-based model, every single thing that can talk to each other needs to have a unique IP. And that simply does not go all the way to the top. And not to mention, a lot of the hops, a lot of the networking that happens today actually consists of many hops. So whether that be through global load balancers or through Istio gateways or Envoy gateways or whatever gateway you're using that ships with your cloud or whatever it is, there's so many hops that you have to create. You have to ensure that the network identity exists at every layer, and that it becomes an absolute daisy chain of logic that you have to keep for every single request. Scott, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, basically, because there's so little information available at the L3 level, you just have basically source and destination IP. But we have these higher level concepts like workloads, service accounts, pod labels. That's one of the things that the CNI helps us to bridge. So we don't have to put IPs into our policies. We can just do a set of labels for a workload in Kubernetes, and the CNI will handle that. The limitation that you run into there is that now the CNI has to be able to understand all of your concepts, your primitives for identity in your organization. And that's something where we've identified a gap. That's something that Solo. We can get more into that later. I don't want to jump the gun.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, certainly I can imagine the user definitely appreciate that portability factor, right? To be able to specify a label to identify a pod instead of just purely using IP address. So you talk about multiple clusters, even multiple cloud, Eitan. So how does network-based identity work with multi-cluster? I assume it's going to require you have different IPs across different clusters, and maybe there's some other limitations as well.
Yeah. So I mean, if we're again, as I mentioned, if you're dealing with trying to do network identity at a multi-cluster level, one, you need to have unique IPs for every entry. But two, you also need to have a flat network. The pods need to be able to communicate directly with each other, because again, for network identity to function, you really need to have just a single hop. This can talk to this source IP, this destination IP, I can verify, right? So that's great. And if you already have a flat network, then you only have a flat network, then this a flat network style of security might be acceptable. But there are also potential issues with the way this is implemented in Cilium. So right now, when you use a cluster mesh, there's actually an end-to-end connection where they all the agents need to communicate with like all the node agents need the information from all of the other clusters, which is a lot of information for all of them to have. So that's a lot of synchronization that they all have to be doing. So the answer to your question is not no, but it's not yes, right? Does it technically work? Yeah. Are there downsides? Also yes. Especially given the way that we're seeing the industry migrate lately.
Yeah, definitely. And I know flat network is a challenge in many of the cloud provider environment. In fact, that's exactly why in Istio multi-cluster, we always have a multi-network model, because we know most of the users out there are actually running non-flat network. Yeah, so Scott, I'd like to ask your thoughts, pick your brain on how Cilium and Istio can potentially be integrated together. Why would someone wants to maybe just use Cilium, or maybe someone just wants to use Istio, or maybe somebody wants to use both together, right? What are your thoughts on that?
So it's a really good question. When we started with Gloo Mesh, we started with Istio. Istio's enforcement and policy, for the most part, happens on the L7 level. There are policies that could apply to the L4 level, but that happens over TLS. There's no, the L3 and the IP level control of things is not in Istio's domain. So even to connect the actual pods, the workloads in Kubernetes to Istio require some IP tables rules, which is actually going on inside of their the init process that bootstraps the service mesh. A CNI like Cilium obviates that need. You actually will not need to use IP tables for that. Cilium can take over that process, as well as a number of other processes, which can both be seen as an additive to Istio, a replacement in some cases, or an alternative. So in the main case, sorry about that. Hold on one second. Maybe Eitan, you want to pick it up for me?
Yeah, definitely. So as Scott was starting to mention, they really do they complement each other again. So as I was mentioning earlier, and as Scott started to bring up, right, you have this network identity issue when you start to scale into multiple clusters with Cilium. And so Istio from the ground up is built to do L7 identity using the server's account. It uses cryptographically verifiable identity with MTLS, which means that you can use it across your workloads in any data center, any cloud, any cluster. And actually, there's a question in chat that I just want to briefly mention. Is there a hard limit to the number of pods? Yes, technically. Will you ever hit it? No. It is absolutely massive. So it's not so much that the limit of network identity has to do with there being a limit to the number of pods. It's more so that those pods are not necessarily, the pods and the connections are not necessarily cryptographically verifiable for all those connections. Now I can dig more into that if we want, but I also want to let Scott finish his thought.
Thanks, Eitan. Yeah, so basically what it comes down to is that the level of awareness and knowledge that Istio has of the system is higher, basically. We know more content of the type of communication that's going on. We know information about the protocol. If it's HTTP, we know things like host names that are being used. We know paths and HTTP methods that are being used. It gives us more ability to be granular, but it also requires us to run components that can actually parse the HTTP messages, where the policy enforcement happens at a much faster rate, and it's on a lower level of the system. So we don't even need to parse that information. The downside is that it's not as granular. It doesn't give us as much flexibility. So from a high level, in a very short sentence, Cilium and Istio can both make each other better. Depending on what you're looking for as a user, you may just want one or both. And yeah, that's we're looking to enhance the experience for both types of users, all three types of users who want to use just one or who would like to use both.
And if I could, I think you made a great point there, Scott, of they can complement each other. And I think that's really what we believe here at Solo. We believe in this phrase that's been flying around a lot lately called defense in depth, right? Cilium at the L3, L4 level offers really amazing network layer security, really fast, right? As well as all of the observability. And by the way, both of those are going to be in the demo later. But just a little spoiler alert. But they offer those really well. But then again, they don't have they don't have the cryptographically verifiable identity between different cloud providers, between different networks, right? As Lynn was mentioning earlier, how Istio a network is a first-class concept, right? So between the different networks, right, you don't have that you cannot verify where the traffic has been, where it's coming from, right? So the way that we at Solo see it is that there should always be two methods of enforcement. So for any hop within a Kubernetes cluster, or from a EC2 workload, whatever it is, for any single hop within those spaces, we do believe that Cilium and L3 policy are incredibly important to make sure that the connection is secure. Additionally, we believe that when you're going within those hops or between different clusters, when you're making many hops at the same time, right, you need to be able to make sure that point A in that chain is allowed to talk to point Z, right? Because it could have gone through many hops. And so, yes, you need to ensure the single hops, but you also need to ensure the journey. And that's what the L7 identifiable policy allows for you to get. And that's why we think that they're so powerful together. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say if I'm a user, I'm convinced, okay, I want both, right? Because like you said, defense in depth, right? Not only at layer 3 and 4, I also want layer 7. So what is Gloo Mesh doing to make it easy for me so that, because I could do that manually, right? I could deploy network policy for Cilium or some other CNI if I'm not running Cilium, and I could deploy Istio authentication authorization policy. I assume I could potentially do that in a manual way. Is there anything Gloo Mesh is doing to make this easier? Scott?
Yeah, well, this is kind of the whole value proposition of Gloo Mesh. What Gloo Mesh is designed to do is abstract the network concerns from the developers, from the administration team with a single unified API. So you really shouldn't be concerned ultimately with whether you're configuring Istio or Cilium. It's just a matter of which features you have access to, what you're able to manage. And we want to provide the most seamless experience possible, regardless of the size of your infrastructure, your organization. We have a tenancy model that allows you to make use of these underlying tools within an organization across multiple teams.
Yeah, definitely. And just to add to what Scott was saying, we the single pane of glass approach that we take with Gloo Mesh, we feel that applies here 100%. Because when you're trying to lock down service to service communication, right, it shouldn't just be one or the other, right? If a user is running, right, just Cilium, then Gloo Mesh can just do that, right? It can create the L3 policy. If it's running just Istio, the L7 policy. But if you're running both, we can create both, because again, defense in depth. We believe that when you allow a service to talk, when you don't want a service to talk to another service, right, that should be blocked on all possible levels, right? And again, so that's the kind of thing that Gloo Mesh will offer on top, right, of this already what we think of as a very powerful combination or synergy that exists between these two technologies.
Yeah, so I think you just hit one of the question I was thinking. So sounds like I can potentially using Cilium without Istio, right? So depends on, so Gloo Mesh can automatically discover where I have Cilium or some other CNI. Gloo Mesh can also automatically discover whether I have Istio installed. And so based on the automatically discovery result, glue mesh can drive through the lower layer policy, whether it's network policy or Istio authorization policy based on what's out there. In fact, some of the network policy, I believe, are different for different CNI, which could be pretty error prone as the user learning all these.
Indeed, yeah, and that's the kind of thing that we take on, right? Because we, as we've been talking about this whole time, right? We think that Cilium is an incredible product for many, many reasons, but the reality is that other things exist, and so other CNIs exist, and so we take on that responsibility. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention, or Scott, if you want to talk about the multi-tenancy that we also build on top. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Lynn, I didn't.
No, go ahead. Eitan just reached my mind.
I'll let the interviewer do the interviewing.
So yeah, I mean, at Service Mesh Con, right? Christian gave a really good talk about how to do multi-tenancy with Service Mesh. He also introduced the concept of workspace and how workspace can help onboarding team. So can you talk about, in the context of Cilium, what does this mean for a user using workspaces and doing multi-tenancy within Service Mesh?
Sure. So part of Gloo Mesh's user experience and part of the feature suite that it delivers is this thing called a workspace, which is like a virtual namespace that extends beyond a single namespace or a single cluster. And it allows you to group policies, services, etc., under a single umbrella of like a single space, so that teams can operate independently as well as explicitly import and export dependencies between those workspaces. Having that abstraction there has allowed us with Istio to actually simplify a lot of the user configuration workload, because they are defining their organizational boundaries and the dependencies they have within their organization, not having to think so much about the actual individual dependencies between network components, between individual services. A lot of these things can be automated for the user when they set up their tenancy system in Gloo Mesh. So one thing I'm not sure that we've made clear is that a lot of this configuration happens automatically. So just by having Gloo Mesh in your system, just by setting up your workspaces and registering them with Gloo Mesh is able to automatically apply policy to increase the security of your cluster. And then we expose options for making those more granular for more advanced users. But it's really nice that we can offer to users just this seamless connectivity and security model, just based on their organizational boundaries. And that's something that we can do both in Istio and in Cilium, without the user having to do anything other than install them, which they can do with Gloo Mesh. So
that's awesome. I think we're ready to see this in live if we have an environment data.
Sorry,
you're muted. Yeah,
we do.
awesome.
Yeah, let's jump in. All right.
All right, I can't wait because I haven't seen it.
Well, let the demo gods be with me.
Yeah.
And let's share this screen. All righty. So I hope everyone can see my terminal that I've got here. And so before I get started, I sort of want to explain what's running and what exactly the thing that we're demoing today is. So we've been mentioning that Gloo Mesh can power the network policy as well, the L3 policy as well as the L7 policy for your applications across multiple clusters. And so we're going to show a bit of a demo of that right now. So we're going to get into the policy. We're going to get into the YAML. So before I do that, again, I'm just going to give an outline of what's running in these terminal windows. So in this left terminal window over here, this is our management plane. So this is our Gloo Mesh management plane. So if we take a look here in our Gloo Mesh namespace, you can see that we've got our management pods. And then if we take a look at our rightmost, at our right windows, this up here is our cluster 1, and we're running Cilium as well as Istio. So we're actually running both right now, as well as everyone's favorite, the book info application. So that's what's running in cluster 1. We've got the product page, ratings, and 2 revisions of reviews. And then in this downward window, this is our cluster 2. We are also running Cilium and Istio, but we have the rest of the book info application. So that would be reviews v3 and ratings v1. So the first thing I'm going to do is I actually have a access policy here from before. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete that because we're going to go ahead and create that together.
So are these 2 clusters connected for multi-cluster, or?
That's a great question, Lynn. So they are connected via the Istio ingress gateway. So there is no flat network here.
Okay, gotcha. Thank
but
you.
in this particular demo, there won't be any multi-cluster traffic. But they are not. There is no flat network here. They are connected via the Istio ingress gateway.
Yep.
Okay, so I deleted that. So let's go ahead and just test out our traffic to make sure that our pods are able to hit one another. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to exec into our product page. And I'm going to talk to our ratings app. So I'm going to curl our rating service on 9080. Great. Okay, got a 200 and the data that we're expecting. Now I'm going to do the same thing in our cluster 2, except I'm going to do it from the reviews app. All right, so let's go ahead and curl. Awesome. Connect. All right, everything's working. Okay, so now what I'm going to go ahead and do is create our access policy. And what our access policy is going to do is it's going to say only the product page is allowed to talk to ratings. And we're going to see under the hood what Gloo Mesh goes ahead and creates to do this defense in depth that we've been mentioning. So I'm going to go ahead and apply our access policy, and then we're just going to take a look at it here. Alrighty, so let's take a look at this. So what do we got here? Well, we've got apply to destinations. So we're applying to the ratings destination on port 9080 that only, okay, and we're selecting a service account here, only the product page is allowed to talk to the rating service. And it's been accepted by the Gloo Mesh management plane. Awesome. So now
Okay,
I'm going to go ahead and
do a quick question. Oh. I also have the question. So hi,
yeah.
Rob, apologies if I pronounce your name not correctly. Is Envoy still running as a sidecar on the pods?
That's a great question. Envoy is still running as a sidecar on the pod. So as we've been sort of talking about, this is us demonstrating Istio plus Cilium at the same time. So that we have, and I'm going to show this in a second, getting ahead of me here, that Gloo Mesh is going to go ahead and create the authorization policies. So that's the L7 defense for Istio, and then also the network policies. So that's the L3, L4 defense for Cilium. So that with that question answered, I'm going to go ahead and then we can take a look at that here. So I'll just go ahead and show. So if we now check our authorization policies, you'll see that Gloo Mesh has gone ahead and actually created that policy on port 9080 with our product page principal. And as well, we can see our network policy, which selects our book info product page, targeting port 9080 on the ratings. Awesome. So with that done, let's go ahead and try the traffic, right?
Oh, so this is with the service account too?
Yes.
The
yes.
pod selector. So not only you can select it based on namespace, but also on the service account?
Correct. So a lot of the popular CNIs have a way to express this same service account language that Istio uses, but on the network level. So under the hood, and this is very nice, right? Because under the hood, what's happening here is Cilium is actually going ahead and saying, I know that this label, it's actually interesting. These labels are not actually present on the pod. So I could go ahead and check the pod and those wouldn't be there. So Cilium knows that I, as a user, might want to select things given other primitives that the network policy doesn't allow, right? Which is really great, right? So I can go ahead and select, I want to talk about my book info, my product page, and I want to talk about my book info namespace. And it allows us to do that without those labels even being on the pod itself or on the endpoint.
That's really cool, because who would remember to put the label on their pod?
Exactly. So the only way you could do that is with, either you have the automation to put it on every single pod, or you have some sort of webhook. No matter what, you end up in a weird situation. It's handled at the CNI layer. So any more questions before I start the traffic, Lynn?
No, it's good.
All righty. We remember our product page should have access. Boom, there you go. So let's go ahead and in our second cluster, try that same call. Uh-oh, it's hanging. That's not good. Wait, that is good, because that's what we wanted to happen. So what's happening on our second cluster is that we're trying to curl ratings from the reviews app, but the reviews app doesn't have access. So let's go ahead and take a look and see if we can see the same policies that we noticed on that earlier cluster on cluster 1, now on cluster 2. So as you can see here, that now still only the product page is allowed to talk to ratings. And if we get the network policy, there's no pod selector for the rating for the review service. So what's happening?
Because the product page doesn't run on this cluster, so the network policy is different. So it actually, so I think there's a couple of things interesting. So first of all, you deploy this policy, access policy, on the management cluster. You didn't deploy on cluster 1 and 2, and the glue mesh magically based on the context of which pods running on which cluster, and then translate the right network policy and the authorization policy for you in your environment.
Correct. And that actually gets back to the workspace, and the tenancy concept that we mentioned earlier. So I can go ahead actually, and in this window over here, and I can actually go look at our workspace, and that is what will define what is a part of our workspace. And so in this case, we're saying that everything is a part of our workspace. But again, that can be limited by the user, right? In this case, our app spans both clusters. However, it doesn't. So it spans both clusters, but you can make it span whatever distance you want. So there's another question in the chat. Lynn, do you mind? Yeah, so that is a great
Faye,
question.
hey, thanks. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. So Faye, if Gloo mesh creates network policy behind the scene, it essentially should work with any CNI provider. In other words, it should work with Calico as well, for example. So what's special about Gloo mesh and Cilium?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I can field that one.
Yeah, please, Scott.
So this is really just demoing the beginning of our integration with Cilium. There's a lot more that we have in the works and more on our roadmap. To be clear, we actually do, we haven't demoed it for you, but we do support this level of policy as well in Calico. I don't know if, by the way, Eitan, you showed the discovery. I mean, it can be nice to just show that we actually will discover the CNI.
Yeah, no, there. I can definitely show that.
Yeah, it might be nice to just run like a kubectl like share that we create a CR that's used internally called the Discover CNI, and this allows us to track the version and the CNI that's installed on each cluster. It does currently support Calico. The main difference is that there are more advanced features that are specific to different CNIs In particular, we're looking at leveraging eBPF functionality that Cilium provides. One of those is acceleration of Istio. It actually can improve the performance of Istio just by having it installed and enabling the feature. And there are a host of other more specific features and more advanced features that aren't exposed through the generic Kubernetes APIs that we plan to take leverage of in Cilium.
Yeah. And just to take it one step further to finish my demo, because Faye, this is a perfect jump in there, is actually the observability that it gives us. So if I go ahead and port forward my reviews pod here, so I'm going to go ahead and port forward. Sorry, I'm going to port forward Cilium because I want to take a look at the metrics that it's outputting. Because by default, you can configure Cilium to output quite a lot of metrics about the decisions that it's making and about the services that exist on your cluster. And these are, we think, are incredibly useful and are also incredibly performant because, as Scott mentioned, they're running basically right in the kernel. So if I go ahead and curl my metrics and let's look for drop, right? Because earlier I was showing how the reviews packets were being dropped. So let's take a look at that. And look at that, just like that, we see here that Cilium it can actually tell us very easily, just by, without having to do anything, that the source, right? We have our source book info / reviews pod, right? Is talking to the ratings pod over TCP, and it's being denied, and that's why their packet's being dropped. So it's really a mix of a lot of different things. You are 100% right, Faye, that there are so many CNIs out there. And that's exactly one of the reasons why we're using the network policy here. But we also specifically love a lot of the power that eBPF allows for within that networking layer.
Yeah. So in your early demo, not what you were showing now, but in a recording, you also had cluster 2 running with Calico CNI, right? So GlueMesh does have the capability to discover non-Cilium based CNI and then generate the corresponding network policy based on the discovery.
Correct. And it works exactly like I've just shown now.
But now you only have Cilium on both of the cluster, right?
Correct. In this case, and I can go ahead and get the discovered CNI, and we can take a look at exactly what is running here. There we go, Cilium. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, very cool.
Sharing. Yeah.
That's awesome. This is so exciting, the demo you showed. Great work, Eitan, to put this together. So, anything else?
Listen, Scott deserves just as much. He wrote most of the code. I'm just the face,
Well, we are a great team. That's what we do at Solo. We're a great team, right? When Scott gets a phone call, somebody else pick up the conversation. Well, I want to take a minute to thank both of you. It's been really interesting chatting with you, and also, watch the demo to see how powerful GlueMesh can provide the higher layer access policy, which drives lower layer, layer 3, layer 4 network policy with Cilium, and also the Istio layer 7 authorization policy. So very cool. So big shout out to both of you. How do folks reach out to you if they have any questions? Should we ask them to find you on solo.io.slack.com? Join our Slack?
Slack is definitely the best way to reach me. The public Slack. You can just @ me, I'm sure Eitan as well.
Yeah, definitely. I am not a Twitter user, but I'm also all over GitHub. I don't know. Does that have messaging now? It has almost everything else. But yeah, Slack definitely the best way to.
You can find me on Twitter too. If you find the tweet for this, I'm linked on there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again to everyone for your questions, to join in. If you find this interesting, please give us a thumbs up and also hit the subscribe button to our channel so you don't miss any of our future Hoot live episode where we learn these technologies about Istio, Envoy, eBPF, and GraphQL together. And if you have any topics you would love to see, please open an issue or make a comment. Let us know. We will try to find the right speaker to cover the topic you want to see. Again, thanks so much, everyone. Happy learning, and see you guys at the next Hoot episode. Bye now.